Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
For the benefit of anyone in the audience unfamiliar with some of the terms used by people in the men's rights movement, I'll be using the term MRM for the men's rights movement and MRA for men's rights advocates, who can of course be women or men. Honey badgers are female non-feminists or anti-feminists, and most of the world's most notable honey badgers are at this conference, some of them speaking, as in just now, and some not. J4MB, as Paul said, remains the only political party in the English-speaking world campaigning for the human rights of men and boys on many fronts. 20 indeed. Today I'll be talking about 5 issues. Number 1, the state's war on men and boys. Number 2, the role of feminists in that war, the challenging of feminism as an ideology, and the challenging of feminists as individuals. Number 3, the role of the mainstream media. Number 4, public understanding of men's issues. And number 5, our electoral strategy. So we start with the state's war on men and boys. The state has long been at war with men and boys in the UK, as it has in many countries. In last year's general election manifesto, we explored 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted by the state's actions and inactions, usually to advantage women and girls. 17 of those human rights assaults on men and boys are on this banner. There are no areas where the human rights of women and girls specifically are assaulted by the state in the UK today. None. In the UK, men pay almost 3/4 of the income tax that largely finances the state. The proportion has rose in each of the last 4 years for which we have records. So it's men who are largely funding the state, which assaults their human rights in so many areas. The assaults start early, with circumcision. I'll quote the words of a leading barrister at a conference 3 years ago in connection with the circumcision of male minors, which in the UK means males under 18 years of age. The default position of the criminal law is that circumcision is a crime, and it would require a parliamentary override to stop it being a crime. There is no parliamentary override. End of quote. As in many other countries, circumcision of male minors is illegal. We sent freedom of information requests to the Home Office, which has responsibility for the police, and the Crown Prosecution Service, which decides on which prosecutions will be brought. And we asked the simple question, why are prosecutions not being brought against those who perform circumcisions, some of whom we know earn millions of pounds over long careers mutilating the genitals of male minors? The responses of both the Home Office and the CPS were masterpieces of evasion, but neither organisation denied that circumcision is illegal. Circumcision of male minors also breaches United Nations and European Union conventions. The homepage of the Children's Commissioner for England states that all children in the UK enjoy the protection of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. We challenged Anne Longfield, the Children's Commissioner, over the matter, but the lie remains on her website to this day. I'd like to say a few words about the denial of access between children and their fathers and their paternal grandparents. These are grave human rights violations. And they take place because family courts will not act decisively to stop malicious mothers from denying access. And of course, the legal profession profits handsomely from this sea of misery to the tune of many billions of pounds every year. Denial of access to children, we know, is a driver of male suicide. Male suicide is about 3.5 times more common than female suicide in the UK. It's the leading cause of death of British men under the age of 50. In the space of 30 years, the differential between the male suicide rate and the female suicide rate has more than doubled, from 1.7 to 3.5 to 1, and it rises year on year quite reliably. Can you imagine the government's response if the genders were reversed, if far more women than men were ending their own lives? There would be demands for government inquiries and expenditure of huge amounts of taxpayers' money to research and address the problem. The government is currently spending a paltry £1.5 million on research studies into suicide. Not one of the projects are focusing specifically on male suicide. By comparison, the government is spending £30 million, some 20 times larger, encouraging more women into engineering. Clearly a much higher priority for the government. A research study which examined the drivers of male suicide would undoubtedly find that the state's actions and inactions place huge stresses upon men, leading to reactive depression and all too often suicide. That is why the state doesn't finance such studies. The bottom line is that the state simply doesn't care that men end their own lives in such numbers, or that the genitals of male babies, infants, and children are being mutilated. In the eyes of both feminists and the state, males are close to subhuman. That's the bottom line. We cannot expect a state which doesn't care about such issues as male suicide and circumcision to care a jot about all the other areas, all the other problems facing men, and boys for that matter. Boys have been disadvantaged in the education system for almost 30 years, and today about 60% of university students are female. Nicky Morgan, MP, the Education Secretary, is also the Minister for Women and Equalities. That's a great combination of roles, isn't it? As we'd expect, her department is spending nothing on trying to address the problem of male underperformance in the system. To Nicky Morgan and her colleagues, we must assume, male underperformance is not an issue to be remotely concerned about. Education is only one of many areas where the state has bowed to pressure from feminists to advantage women and girls over men and boys. In almost all the 20 areas in our manifesto, feminists have had a malign and often well-documented influence. Perhaps the best documented example is domestic violence, where the government essentially operates under the assumption that the Duluth model is sound. The model claims that men as a class oppress women as a class through violence or the threat of it, but for decades, it's been known the Duluth model is utterly flawed. Hundreds of studies tell us this, but rational arguments have no impact on the government's approach to the area, and support for male victims of domestic violence is, of course, close to non-existent as a result. It is something that I think even some seasoned MRAs struggle to grasp, that their rational arguments have precisely no influence, none, on the political class. The privileging of women and girls always trumps MRA's rational arguments. 4 years ago, shortly before launching J4MB, I experienced for myself how rational arguments are trumped by female privileging. I had launched Campaign for Merit in Business in 2011 to challenge the government's bullying of FTSE 100 companies into appointing more women to their boards until they had a minimum of 25% female representation. The government's threat was to introduce legislated gender quotas if the companies hadn't voluntarily achieved that representation by 2015. Now, that's an interesting use of the word voluntarily. I think we can agree. It's like a mugger politely telling you that he'll shoot you if you don't voluntarily hand over your money. But this is the language they use every time. By 2012, evidence was mounting, particularly from Norway, after it legislated for gender quotas on boards, that there exists a demonstrable causal link between increasing the proportion of women on corporate boards and corporate financial decline. I presented that evidence to House of Commons and House of Lords inquiries, and the impact on the government's direction of travel in this area was precisely zero. The government is currently bullying the top 350 British companies into having gender-balanced boards in the next few years. We turn to feminism. It's hardly surprising that MRAs have spent so much time and effort challenging feminism as an ideology and challenging individual feminists and continue to do so. But we have a curious paradox here. While only a small minority of women today self-identify as feminists, the influence of feminists in our institutions has never been greater. And it continues to increase year after year. These women, Alison Saunders, I guess, is an obvious example, are immune to criticism or ridicule or shaming tactics because they have an unshakable belief in the worthiness of their cause. And the mainstream media very, very rarely hold them to account. They have no reservations about lying to achieve their goals, and none of the women to whom we've presented our Lying Feminist of the Month awards have ever retracted their lies, let alone apologized for them. Caroline Criado Perez has won 3 of the awards. She's leading at the moment. And when challenged by Philip Schofield on national television over why she'd won the awards, she laughed and said it was because she'd lied. Oh, and she also went in for some jazz hands, it's got to be said. Schofield looked rather bewildered and just didn't pursue the matter. MRAs continue to spend a considerable amount of time destroying feminist arguments. There can't be one element of feminist theory which hasn't been destroyed countless times. And yet the mainstream media continues to faithfully report feminist narratives on issues such as the gender bloody pay gap. Despite detailed debunking by MRAs decade after decade. The continuing failure of the mainstream media to critique feminism and hold individual feminists to account is an astonishing thing. But frankly, I don't see it changing anytime soon. The BBC is particularly anti-male, and in recent months has given a huge amount of exposure to the absurd Women's Equality Party. But the BBC is the state broadcaster, so what else might we expect from them? A year or two ago, I was taken on as a fortnightly columnist by the International Business Times, purportedly to provide balance against their two female feminist columnists. After just 2 well-received articles on male suicide and women in boardrooms, the paper cancelled my contract and replaced me with Ali Fogg, a male Guardian feminist columnist. So that's 2 female columnists and that's 2 female feminists and 1 male feminist. Balance is a fine thing. To the best of my knowledge, there isn't a firmly anti-feminist columnist in the English language mainstream media anywhere in the world today. I believe we should work on the assumption that the mainstream media aren't going to give men's issues the attention they deserve in the foreseeable future. Let's stop fantasizing that the tide is about to turn or the dam's about to break. It's not. Those things are not going to happen. I'd like to say a few words about street protesting here, something I've never done before the past year or two. Our street protesting has mainly concerned male circumcision, and I'd like to say a big, big thank you to all those in this room and elsewhere who've been involved in those protests in the past 9 months. We were anticipating opposition during one of the early protests outside the Thornhill clinic, the country's largest circumcision clinic in Luton, a large town with a 25% Muslim population. It was the largest anti-circumcision protest ever held in the UK. In the event, we faced almost no hostility. The same was true for our protest in Golders Green, an area of North London with a very large Jewish community. We had plenty of constructive discussions with people, and only a few people were hostile towards us. We handed out thousands of leaflets, must have had hundreds of conversations. One of the leaflets had content from Jews Against Circumcision, an extraordinary American organization. And we're planning to protest regularly in Luton, Golders Green, and elsewhere in the coming months and years until we see an end to circumcision of male minors in the UK. I turn now to the issue of the public understanding of men's issues. Like many MRAs, I spend a good deal of time communicating with like-minded people, reading their outputs, and so on. And it's all too easy to believe that public understanding of men's issues is increasing more rapidly than it actually is. I think in part because we want to believe that. And it raises our morale. But, you know, if you talk to strangers and try and get a sense of what they understand about men's issues, you know, you'll be very lucky to find someone who has any grasp of the issues. So I think it's time for MRAs to take a reality check. While public understanding of men's issues is undoubtedly on the increase, in my view, it's not doing so at a pace that will ever deliver meaningful change for men. Feminists benefit from the societal disinclination to challenge women as a class or as individuals. Whatever feminists demand, however irrational and damaging to society, the political class will try to satisfy their demands. So, of course, the feminists will demand ever more. Sorry, just saying. I believe MRAs spend, and I'm certainly guilty of this myself, I believe MRAs spend too much of their limited time and energy attacking feminism as an ideology and attacking individual feminists. The usually unstated premise is that rational arguments, or ridiculing and shaming feminists, will stop their lies and their manipulations. All the evidence, sadly, is that those approaches simply never work. Among feminists' many failings is their lack of a moral compass. For feminists, the end, the extension of female privilege, regardless of consequences, always justifies the means. Rational arguments are doomed to failure when it comes to feminists, in part because you can't reason someone out of a belief they haven't been reasoned into. The time has surely come to accept that feminists are never going to stop making their demands, regardless of the consequences. We must hold politicians to account for their craven capitulation to these damnable women's demands. The political class has not the slightest intention of engaging constructively with MRAs, even when they do meet, for example, especially when politicians are in opposition, they're quite keen to to meet fathers' rights groups and so on, and they make promises, and they always renege once in power. It's happened time and time again. We need to start making politicians suffer consequences for assaulting the human rights of men and boys in terms of not being re-elected at general elections. We need politicians to know that if they continue their assaults on the human rights of men and boys, not only will they risk losing their cushy jobs, but their parties will lose power at the next general election. This brings me to our electoral strategy. We don't believe anymore that growing public consciousness about men's issues will stop politicians assaulting men's and boys' human rights. We believe that what is required is an event that will rock the political establishment to its core, forcing men's issues onto the political radar and generating, at last, strong mainstream media coverage. And that event, for us, will be the ruling political party losing office on account of the anti-male positions it's taken during its term in office, or even the credible threat of that possibly happening. So we always focus our challenges on the party in power, because only that party can end the state's assaults on men's and boys' human rights. There is frankly today little to separate the main parties when it comes to assaulting those human rights. We plan to field candidates in the top 20 Conservative marginal seats in 2020, and we have the income streams in place to fund all 20 £500 deposits. At the last general election in May 2015, Conservative candidates beat their Conservative candidates. So we're targeting the top 20 Conservative marginals in 2020, and in May 2015, the top 20 marginal candidates beat their nearest rivals, almost always Labour candidates, by an average of fewer than 750 votes in each of those 20 constituencies. All else being equal, had those Conservative candidates collectively secured just 15,000 fewer votes, the Conservatives would have lost the last general election. If a party could reasonably be credited with causing a major party to lose a general election, that would be huge news. Even the possibility of it happening, I think, would be a big news story. The clear message it would send out to future governments would be this: unless you stop assaulting the human rights of men and boys, you will not be re-elected at the next general election. We will maintain our commitment to end male circumcision in the UK, but we need to campaign more in some areas which will attract far more votes. And the most obvious area is the denial of access between children, fathers, and paternal grandparents. The next general election is almost 4 years away, and we plan to become the political voice for people concerned about this subject in the UK. And there are many millions of those people here. I should like to end with an appeal for support for J4MB. Nobody connected with the party derives any personal income from donations. Our principal sources of funding are subscriptions from party members, and we have many members outside the UK, notably in the US, Canada, and Australia. They recognise that we have a strategy which could shake the foundations of the political establishment, which would then be felt around the world. We're not only looking for more financial support, we're looking for people who can support us in other ways, including standing for us as candidates at the 2020 general election. Candidates need not live in the constituencies in which they're standing. Indeed, they need not even live in the UK. Commonwealth citizens are eligible to stand in general elections in the UK. So, Janet, you know what you're doing in 2020. So, if anyone in this room might consider standing for J4MB in 2020, making 20 Conservative MPs accountable for their party's assaults on the human rights of men and boys, I'd ask them to contact me. All it will take is 20 determined people, and there are 200 people in this room today. Together we can do this. Thank you.
Questions for Mike?
Mike, you talked about the funding streams for candidates for the 2020 election. If that election is a lot sooner, which it might well be, given the Brexit issues, is the party going to be in a position to field candidates?
No, Theresa May, I think, has made it very clear that she will not be calling a general election. I don't know Andrea Leadsam's position on it, but no, I think it'd be a mistake. I mean, if she called if one of the two called a snap general election, I think it'd be a mistake strategically for us to we aren't ready now, but we will be very ready in 4 years.
Well, I think possibly almost answered my question. Thanks for an excellent speech, Mike. I was just going to say, how feasible is it, do you think, that in election in 4 years or so, your plan, which I think is a very good one, that will have enough people standing that we actually will be able to influence the general election as you hope? Is that feasible?
I think it is feasible. I mean, I think with each general election that the feasibility increases. But we have 4 years. We're planning to start street campaigning in the autumn, in a few months' time. So we thought, well, perhaps if we start campaigning 3 years before anyone else, so it's through sheer hard work, But it takes people to actually stand up, and we need 20 good people, and that's what it'll take. If those 20 people don't come forward, then we have no strategy. But I mean, 20 people, 200 in this room.
Yes, thank you. Hello. Hi. I just want.
Oh.
Hi.
Sorry.
Hello.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
How you doing over there? I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on the impact or the influence of the gender political conversation of there being 3 female heads of state in Germany, UK, and America.
It's not good, is it? Well, we're heading towards a position in the UK of almost a clean sweep. I think of political parties are going to be led by women soon. But frankly, I mean, I sort of make light of it. But I mean, are the men any better? I mean, David Cameron, for all he's denied being a feminist, but everything he's done in office has been feminist friendly. I worked for the Conservatives from 2006 to 8, but I resigned my party membership in 2009 when Cameron announced his intention to introduce all women shortlists. There was the party membership went crazy over that, and it was dropped. But he was showing his credentials there, and appointing a woman to be both Education Secretary and Minister for Women and Equalities. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about Cameron. So, I mean, will the women be any worse than the men? No reason to think so.
With regards to your election campaign next year and what you were saying about people standing from outside the constituency and the Commonwealth, is it possible to widen that concept out a bit and realise that homeless people basically live anywhere and it should be possible to register them to vote in a constituency via postal vote?
Right. Yes.
Because there's a lot of homeless people. There's a lot of homeless people that are men. There's a lot of homeless men that are homeless due to what you're campaigning about. And if they were to be registered to vote in a certain constituency, there's a possible landslide.
Yeah. I guess the problem is, if someone has no fixed abode, then that's a problem in terms of enfranchisement, isn't it? But no, it's a good point. I mean, 90% of street homeless people are men. So they are kind of our natural constituency. One of many, yeah.
Yeah, but there should be a possibility, if you've got one address, if you can postal address them to register in a constituency. It only takes an office.
But I think, going back to the point that it's the state that's the problem. The state is violently anti-male. What is in it for the state to register homeless people? 90% of whom are men. I just don't see why they would do it.
Yep, I understand that they wouldn't really want to do it, but I'm just sort of throwing it out there as an idea.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. Great idea, yeah.
Hi, Mike. Here I am. First, thanks for the work you do. I've often been on the fence about this issue of male attendance at college. I can't speak for the UK, but in the US, they're now estimating that within the next 15 years, about 30% of American universities will go bankrupt. We have produced too many schools, and we have cheapened the education process, and a lot of the students are going to community colleges, and they're not going to universities, and they're not taking any real majors. A lot of the women are gravitating towards social sciences and not getting jobs, and the men are gravitating, of course, to engineering and getting jobs. Whereas the students not going to college, and many of whom are men, are going into trades. And I think that in the future, software robots like Google will replace women's jobs long before the mechanical robots replace men's jobs. There's always going to be a need for plumbers and electricians. And I think men are situated quite well. So I'd like to have your thoughts on that, whether or not there might be too much of a focus on the educational system. Maybe that's going to actually benefit men in the end.
Yeah. I think this varies very much country by country. I think, doesn't it? So in countries where people have to take out large loans, as they do, in a number of countries.
If I may interrupt, I found out also that in the US and in the UK, the people who are going bankrupt at high rates these days are actually women. They're just men because of the college loans they're taking out, and they can't. Naturally, they blame men because they only make 76 cents to a dollar. but I don't know if it's going to be as bad. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think in area after area, the feminization of workforces has been a disaster. In the 1970s, Dr. Vernon Coleman was warning that the feminization of the NHS in terms of, in terms of having more female medical students was going to be disastrous because they simply typically didn't have the work ethic of their male colleagues. And I can't speak of other countries, but in the UK, medical schools have to train two women to get to get the output over careers as one man. And the NHS, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it. It's just an incredibly flawed model. And these women typically will not work in areas like A&E. They won't come out at night. They won't do weekend work. Even if they don't have kids, they'll probably work part time. About 30 years ago, you could get an appointment with your general practitioner, often within the day or the same day. The last time I needed a GP, my GP, I was quoted 3 weeks. And so it's disastrous. But I mentioned engineering at Brunel University last year. Women who wanted to do an MSc course in engineering were basically just given a lump sum of £23,000 denied to their male colleagues. Just insane.
Yeah, but they wind up leaving.
They do. Engineering is a great example because a lot of female engineering graduates never go into the career. They even when they do go into it, they tend to leave early. They very, very seldom return to it after having children. So here they are taking the place of a man who could do great things with that. It's just crazy.
I'll add something to that particular subject. I'm a veterinarian, and when I graduated 30 years ago, I was in a class where it was 50-50 male-female. Now, in Australia, we graduate 90% female graduates. Actually, it's been the saving of the profession because at the same time as our population has grown by 10%, our number of veterinarians graduating from universities has doubled. And in fact, in my state, where we have a registered veterinarian population of 650, we graduate 100 every year. Now, there's some maths issues there, but fortunately, the dominant female graduating class don't spend 40 years working.
No.
And otherwise, the profession would have been suffering from a massive overpopulation. So I do think we need to look at the university system. The university's interest is selling education, and there are certain classes they can fill up and happy to do so. But the government's funding it. even if they're not funding it fully. And that's another question that needs debate.
Mike, I totally agree that the only way to achieve anything is to basically tell politicians or political parties, if you're not going to pay attention to our issues, you're going to lose our vote. It's a very ambitious target, and we're looking at. I live in Germany, and where one of my main concerns is to actually get towards where you're trying to get to as well. Don't you think that you're going to need allies and other organizations? And B, because essentially, in my view, most of men's rights issues can only be solved in the long term with a joint vision of what men and women are going to do together in society and how they want to live and so on and so forth, that you're going to need to do this with women.
Right, but there are no political parties which have an interest in men's issues. I mean, that's just the bottom line.
Other organisations apart from parties.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'd love to have good relationships with. There's a number of interesting charities, let's say, in the area of fathers' rights and so on. But we found them pretty disinclined to get involved with a political party. I mean, charities in particular are concerned about being seen as connecting with political parties. But in terms of numbers, I mean, the one issue out of all these issues that the general public kind of gets is the denial of access between fathers and their children. I mean, there cannot be many people in this country who have either not personally seen that or have friends and family who've seen it. So to us, it's the big issue. And so if we can say to people, I mean, there's so much suffering there. And if we can say to people, look, all you need to do is to put a cross in a box to register your protest at these human rights violations. And going back to the point, all we would need to do in those 20 constituencies is to make the ruling party, the Conservatives at the moment, lose 750 votes on average across those constituencies. We would only need 15,000 votes across the country. To deprive the Conservatives of 15,000 votes. So it's a question, I think, of saying to floating voters, this is why you should not vote Conservative, or Labour, or whoever's the incumbent at the time. And I think that's just a very doable thing. But we need 20 people. So hands up, anybody who's there. So this is our first candidate. This is our.
Just a quick comment regarding the value of challenging feminists in the public space.
So sorry, I can't see who's speaking.
Over here.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
The value of challenging feminists in the public space is not to change their minds, because, as you quite rightly pointed out, you can't. The value of it is to influence the multitude of silent bystanders and observers, many of whom are undecided and largely unaware of men's issues.
But the problem is there that, if the mainstream media, let's say, took up our Lying Feminist of the Month awards or Toxic Feminist of the Month awards and just listen to us in terms of some of the toxic feminists. I mean, Vera Baird QC up in Northumbria, the Northumbria Police and Crime Commissioner, they just give her a total easy ride. And, so, yeah, I understand your point, but it's just difficult to get through to serious numbers of people.
As I'm from Germany, I cannot be some of the 20, but I can be your ally. And my idea is, as I have a wiki platform, I can promote all the candidates in UK who's helping men and boys and blaming who does not. And we can make it in internet, a smart sheet of every politician who is candidating for the parliament. He is not supporting, he's supporting. And this is my offer for you.
Okay, thank you. You'll find that among MPs, there'll be one name on the list of people, of MPs supporting men and boys, and that's Philip Davis. Everybody else, just never, ever talks about men's issues.
Myself, good. I hate to be a skeptic. Well, I don't. I love being a skeptic now. But the truth is, as I see it, and I've heard other people say, that in politics you have to compromise your ideals. The more and more, the higher and higher you get on the slippery pole. And also, bearing in mind, as you say, the state is so feminist already. How I can't see how you can be a politician and not toe the line and survive. We all know how they make promises, and when they get in, everyone's absolutely shocked how, well, they don't make promises, they make manifestos. And everyone's surprised how they don't actually execute their manifestos. And 50% of the population are female, and a lot of those believe they're feminists, and even more so men. So I really need convincing that other than I can't remember the word now, but by not consenting to the government and by withdrawing from the government, how by using government we can have any better effect. So I really need that. That promise.
Yeah, the government will not engage. They are our enemies. The idea that there's anything we can do or say to make political parties and the government less anti-male is a fantasy. And you look back at what. The efforts, let's say, of Fathers' Rights campaigners, decade after decade they've tried to engage. I mean, how many people have written to their MPs, met their MPs, and the sum total of that is absolutely zero. We have to just accept the state is our enemy. Yes, it's powerful, but it's our enemy. And you talk about towing the line. Well, I guess 20 years ago, Nigel Farage decided not to toe the line, and that's why we've just had a referendum.
Hi, Mike. Yeah, the Brexit issue. It has taken UKIP 20 years to get noticed, and while I'm very sad as what's happened, I'm really scared of the future. I mean, do you see this as an opportunity now that all the power that we have in this country is concentrated at Westminster, that we're probably going to withdraw from the Human Rights Convention, we won't be able to use human rights legislation in the future, or do you see this as the start of a long process like UKIP? You see, as I say, it took them 20 years. They only had one MP, but as you say, they took away a lot of votes from Conservatives particularly. And Cameron was frightened. That's why he put the referendum in the 2015 manifesto. Not because UKIP had won, but simply because UKIP were threatening to break through. And do you see you can keep this going for 20 years? And do you see Brexit as a... Well,
I think I'll be getting a bit long in the tooth. I'm 58 now, so no, I don't think I'll be doing it in 20 years' time. But yeah, I mean... I think we need to get to the position where the Conservative Party in this, or the ruling party, knows that its top 20 marginal prospects are going to be lost. And I mean, if it's a two-horse race, and we might get back to that situation one day, then there could be a Labour Conservative differential of 40 seats there, and it only takes 20 seats. I think that will be enough. And as for Brexit, I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think the political classes will renege on that. If I was a betting man, and I'm not, I would put serious money that this country is not going to leave the EU in the next few years.
One last question over here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing about the. You suggested that there'll be 3 female leaders. I'm an American but living abroad right now, so I read all the newspapers, and I've noticed a pattern has begun in the American newspapers where many female journalists have now begun to write that it's very strange that men are not supporting Hillary. I've seen it.
Wow.
Just in the past 2 weeks, and if you step back from that and look at it as an undercurrent, it suggests that there's a concern in the Democratic Party that she's going to lose because so many men have left the party. And I am more concerned about the backlash, because if she does lose, men will be blamed. And I just wanted to throw that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also, I mean, what's been heartening is the number of women who are not following Hillary.
But I think they'll be excused.
Of course. Of course, always.
Don't worry, it's going to be President Trump anyway.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Buchanan. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.